Everything you think you know about Wild West gunfights is probably wrong. Those dramatic showdowns at high noon, the lightning-fast draws, the perfectly aimed hip shots that never missed. Hollywood didn't just bend the truth. It shattered it completely and rebuilt the myth from scratch. Today, we're tearing apart 13 myths that filmmakers have been feeding you for over a century, and number 1 reveals the biggest deception Hollywood has been selling since the silent film era. Number 13, the high noon fast draw duel. Picture the scene you've watched in countless westerns. 2 men face each other on a dusty main street. The town clock strikes 12. Their hands hover over their holsters as sweat drips down their faces. Townspeople scatter for cover. A dog barks in the distance. Then, in a blur of motion, both men draw and fire. One falls dead while the other holsters his smoking revolver and walks away without a scratch. It never happened. Not once. The quick draw duel is pure Hollywood invention, created decades after the frontier era had already ended. There are no reliable historical accounts of 2 gunfighters squaring off in a formal street duel during the actual Old West period. Researchers have combed through newspapers, court records, and personal accounts from the 1860s through the 1890s. They found saloon brawls, ambushes, and murders. But formal quick-draw duels at high noon simply don't appear in the historical record. The famous showdown between Wild Bill Hickok and Davis Tutt in 1865 is often cited as the closest real example, but even that encounter bore little resemblance to movie duels. The 2 men were roughly 75 yards apart, an enormous distance for a pistol shot. Both drew their weapons at nearly the same time, and Hickok didn't fire from the hip. He steadied his revolver on his opposite forearm and took careful aim before firing a single shot. It was marksmanship, not speed, that won that fight. Real frontier violence was chaotic, sudden, and rarely fair. Men were shot in the back while walking down the street. They were ambushed in dark alleys without warning. They were gunned down in their sleep or attacked while unarmed. The idea of giving your opponent an equal chance to draw was considered foolish, not honorable. Survival meant striking first, striking fast, and making absolutely sure your target never got the opportunity to shoot back. Wyatt Earp himself, one of the most famous lawmen of the era, later admitted that the key to winning a gunfight wasn't speed. It was keeping calm and taking the extra half-second to aim properly. He reportedly said that a man who rushed his draw and jerked his trigger usually sent his first shot into the dirt. The man who stayed cool, who raised his weapon and picked his target, usually lived to tell the story. The quick draw myth emerged from dime novels and Wild West shows in the late 1800s, then exploded into legend when silent films needed dramatic visual conflict. By the 1920s, exhibition shooters like Ed McGivern were performing lightning-fast draws at fairs and theaters, cementing the image forever. These performers, not actual gunfighters, invented the techniques that Hollywood still uses today. The movies didn't document history. They replaced it with something that looked better on screen. Number 12, the low-slung Hollywood holster. That iconic image of a gunslinger with his revolver hanging low on his thigh, tied down with leather thongs, looks incredible on camera. It also didn't exist until 1922. The low-slung rig, called the buscadero, was invented by Hollywood costume designers and leather workers like Ed Bolan, who needed holsters that would show off actors' revolvers on screen. A high-riding holster, the kind actually used on the frontier, kept the gun too close to the body for good camera angles, so they designed something that looked dramatic, rather than something that actually worked. Real cowboys and gunfighters wore their revolvers high on the belt, close to the natural waist. A Colt single-action army weighed nearly 3 pounds loaded. Hanging that weight low on your thigh would have been exhausting during a full day's work and absolutely impractical while riding a horse. The gun would slap against your leg, get caught on saddle horns, and shift around constantly. Historical photographs from the 1870s and 80s confirm this reality. Every authentic image shows revolvers riding high, often with the butt canted forward for a cross draw or angled slightly back for a cavalry twist. The trigger guard was almost always covered by the holster's leather, not exposed like in movies. The drop loop design that defined the buscadero wasn't just impractical, it was slower to draw from. Reaching down to your thigh requires more arm movement than reaching to your natural waist. Exhibition shooters and film stars could make it look fast through endless practice, but no working cowboy or lawman would have chosen that setup for actual combat. Tom Mix, Buck Jones, and other silent film stars made the Buscadero famous. Within a decade, audiences assumed it was historically accurate. The lie became so embedded in popular culture that even historians sometimes forget the rig was born on a Hollywood backlot, not the streets of Tombstone. Number 11. Fanning the hammer. In dozens of Western films, you've watched gunslingers fire their revolvers by slapping the hammer repeatedly with their offhand while holding down the trigger. The cylinder spins, bullets fly, and enemies drop in rapid succession. In reality, fanning was a good way to waste ammunition. Destroy your revolver and hit absolutely nothing you were aiming at. The technique does work mechanically. Holding back the trigger on a single action revolver allows the hammer to fall each time it's pulled back and released. But the violent slapping motion made accurate shooting virtually impossible. Every impact of your palm against the hammer shifted the gun's alignment. After 2 or 3 shots, you weren't even pointing at your original target anymore. Period accounts and shooting experts consistently condemn fanning as foolish and dangerous. Professional gunfighters like Wyatt Earp and Bat Masterson emphasized deliberate, aimed fire over spray and pray tactics. Ammunition was expensive, often costing more than a day's wages for a single box of cartridges. Nobody who depended on their gun for survival would waste rounds on a technique that rarely hit anything. Fanning also caused serious mechanical damage. The repeated impacts stressed the hammer, the hand spring, and the cylinder stop. A revolver that was fanned regularly would soon develop timing issues, misfires, and eventually catastrophic failures. Gunsmiths of the period specifically warned against the practice. The technique gained popularity through Wild West shows and later Hollywood films because it looked spectacular. The rapid fire and spinning cylinder created visual excitement that careful aimed shooting simply couldn't match. But it was always performance, never practical combat technique. If you've made it this far, you're clearly interested in the real history, not the Hollywood fantasy. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss our next deep dive into the truths the movies tried to bury. Number 10. Endless ammunition. Watch any classic Western and count the shots. You'll quickly realize that revolvers apparently held 15, 20, or even 30 rounds. Characters blaze away in extended gunfights without ever reloading, their cylinders somehow never running dry. A single revolver becomes a magical fountain of endless ammunition, spitting lead as long as the scene requires. The reality was brutally different. A standard Colt single-action army held 6 rounds. A Winchester 1873 held 15 in its magazine, and reloading either weapon under fire was a slow, dangerous, and often fatal process. To reload a single-action revolver, a shooter had to open the loading gate, manually eject each spent casing one at a time using the ejector rod, then insert fresh cartridges individually into each chamber. There were no speed loaders, no moon clips, no quick-release cylinders. Even an experienced hand needed at least 30 seconds to fully reload. In a gunfight where everything happened in moments, 30 seconds might as well have been 30 minutes. A man caught reloading was a man caught defenseless. This limitation shaped every aspect of frontier combat. Men counted their shots religiously, always knowing exactly how many rounds remained. They sought cover before their cylinder ran dry. Many carried a second revolver rather than rely on reloading the first under fire. The practice of loading only 5 rounds and keeping the hammer down on an empty chamber for safety further reduced available firepower to just 5 shots before a man was empty. Ammunition itself was precious and not always available. Cowboys on remote cattle drives might go weeks without access to fresh supplies. A box of 50 cartridges could cost $2 or more when a cowhand earned around $30 a month. That meant every bullet represented real money, real effort to acquire. Nobody sprayed bullets carelessly or fired warning shots into the air. Every round mattered. The endless ammunition myth emerged because reloading sequences killed dramatic pacing. Audiences wanted action, not characters fumbling with cartridges behind cover while the tension deflated, so filmmakers simply ignored ballistic reality and kept the guns firing as long as the scene demanded. After a century of this treatment, most viewers have no concept of how limiting 6 shots actually was, or how that limitation defined every decision a man made when his life was on the line. Number 9. Deadly accurate hip shooting. The movie Gunslinger draws, fires from the hip, and drops his opponent with a perfect shot to the heart. No aiming required, no sights needed. The bullet finds its target through pure instinct and frontier skill, guided by some mystical connection between a gunfighter and his weapon. This is perhaps the most dangerous myth Hollywood ever created about gunfighting. Hip shooting, firing without raising the weapon to eye level and using the sights, is dramatically less accurate than aimed fire. At distances beyond 10 feet, hitting a man-sized target from the hip requires enormous luck. The slight angle differences in how you hold the gun, variations so small you can't even feel them, translate to misses measured in feet, not inches, by the time the bullet reaches its target. Tilt the barrel up by just 1 degree, and at 20 feet your shot sails over your opponent's head. Cant it slightly left, and you miss his body entirely. Without sights to align, a shooter is essentially guessing where the bullet will go. Every serious gunfighter of the frontier era emphasized the importance of aimed fire. Wyatt Earp's famous advice was to take your time in a hurry, meaning you should stay calm even as your heart pounds out of your chest, raise your weapon to eye level, use your sights, and make that first shot count. The man who blazed away from the hip usually missed and died, wondering why his bullet didn't find its mark. The man who took the extra second to aim usually won and lived to tell the story. Period accounts of actual gunfights consistently describe participants raising their weapons and taking deliberate aim. Wild Bill Hickok's legendary shot against Davis Tutt was carefully aimed, steadied against his forearm at 75 yards. The gunfight at the OK Corral involved men who raised and pointed their revolvers before firing. Even in close quarters saloon fights, survivors reported taking time to aim despite the chaos and terror of the moment. Hip shooting became a Hollywood standard because it looked faster and more dramatic than the relatively static image of a man sighting down his barrel. The quick draw from holster to hip-level fire read better on camera and conveyed instant deadliness. But the technique sacrificed accuracy that real gunfighters couldn't afford to lose. In the actual West, your first shot might be your only shot. Missing wasn't an option. Number 8. Gunfights that lasted minutes. Screen gunfights stretch on for entire scenes. Men exchange dozens of shots, take cover, reload, maneuver for position, and engage in running battles through towns, canyons, and buildings. The violence might last 5, 10, even 15 minutes of screen time. Real gunfights were over in seconds, sometimes in a single shot. The engagement at the OK Corral, probably the most famous gunfight in American history, lasted approximately 30 seconds. 30 rounds were fired. 3 men died. The entire violent encounter was over before most witnesses fully understood what was happening. This brevity was typical. Gunfights were explosions of violence that ended almost as soon as they began. The human body under extreme stress doesn't allow for the extended tactical thinking that movie gunfights portray. Heart rates spike, fine motor control deteriorates, and tunnel vision sets in. Men fired rapidly, emptied their weapons, and either won or died in moments. The short duration also reflected the nature of the weapons and ammunition. 6 shots went fast. Reloading took too long. Once the shooting started, it had to end quickly one way or another. Extended firefights simply weren't possible with the technology of the era. Survival often came down to who shot first and who kept their composure long enough to aim properly. There was no time for clever tactics, dramatic pauses, or witty one-liners. The violence was sudden, brutal, and over before anyone had time to think. Hollywood stretched gunfights for dramatic purposes. A 30-second climax doesn't justify 90 minutes of buildup. So filmmakers expanded moments into minutes, creating an entirely false impression of what frontier violence actually looked like. Number 7. Everyone carried a gun. In movie versions of the Old West, every man walks around armed. Cowboys, shopkeepers, bankers, and bartenders all have revolvers strapped to their hips. The entire population seems ready for combat at any moment. The truth is that most frontier residents didn't carry firearms at all, and in many towns, they legally couldn't. Revolvers were expensive. A Colt single-action army cost around $17 when it debuted in 1873. A working cowboy earned about $1 a day. That meant a quality sidearm cost more than 2 weeks' wages. Most laborers, farmers, and town workers simply couldn't afford that kind of investment for something they rarely needed. Ammunition added ongoing costs. Maintaining a weapon required time and supplies. For the average frontier resident, a gun was a luxury, not a necessity. They were far more likely to own a rifle or shotgun for hunting and home defense than an expensive revolver for daily carry. Town ordinances made the situation even clearer. Dodge City, Tombstone, Wichita, and Deadwood all had strict laws prohibiting firearms within city limits. Visitors were required to check their weapons at the sheriff's office or their hotel upon arrival. Walking the streets armed could result in fines, jail time, or both. These weren't suggestions. They were enforced laws. Tombstone's famous Ordinance No. 9, passed in 1881, explicitly banned carrying deadly weapons in town. The gunfight at the OK Corral was partly sparked by the Earp's attempt to enforce these very regulations against the Clantons and McClorys. Hollywood armed everyone because unarmed characters couldn't participate in gunfights. But the historical reality was a population that mostly kept their guns at home and their hands empty. Number 6. The Saloon Shootout. Picture the classic scene. A card game goes wrong. Accusations of cheating fly across the table. Men leap to their feet, overturn tables, and start blazing away while bottles shatter and mirrors explode behind the bar. Piano music stops. Women scream. Bodies hit the floor amid a haze of gun smoke and spilled whiskey. In reality, most saloons were strictly gun-free zones, and proprietors enforced this rule with serious consequences. Saloon owners understood that armed, intoxicated customers were a recipe for disaster. These were businessmen first and foremost. Dead patrons were bad for business. Bullet holes in the walls and broken fixtures cost money to repair. Blood on the floor scared away paying customers. A reputation for violence could shut down an establishment faster than any city ordinance. Most saloons required visitors to check their firearms at the door, storing them behind the bar or in a dedicated gun check room. A man who wanted to drink had to hand over his hardware first. Town ordinances supported these policies with legal force. The same laws that banned guns on the streets applied even more strictly to drinking establishments, gambling halls, and dance halls. Places like Dodge City and Tombstone specifically targeted saloons in their weapons ordinances, recognizing that alcohol and firearms created obvious dangers. A man caught armed in a saloon faced the same penalties as anywhere else in town, often enforced more harshly because lawmen knew exactly what happened when liquor and loaded revolvers mixed. When violence did occur in saloons, it more often involved knives, fists, or improvised weapons like chair legs and whiskey bottles. A hidden derringer might come into play, small enough to slip past the gun check. But full-scale revolver battles inside drinking establishments were extraordinarily rare. The combination of alcohol, gambling losses, and wounded pride certainly created conflicts. Tempers flared, insults were exchanged, but most disagreements were resolved with fists, broken bottles, or a quick ejection by the bartender wielding a bung starter, not a hail of gunfire. The saloon shootout became a Hollywood staple because it combined multiple dramatic elements into one explosive package. Confined space, flowing alcohol, high-stakes gambling, and armed men created a visual recipe that filmmakers couldn't resist. But like so much else in Western films, it sacrificed historical accuracy for entertainment value. The real saloons were rowdy, sometimes violent, but rarely the bullet-riddled war zones Hollywood made them out to be. Number 5. The Honor Code Duel. Movies love to portray frontier gunfights as affairs of honor. Two men with a grievance meet face to face, announce their intentions, and settle the matter in open combat. The winner walks away knowing he defeated his enemy fairly. Real frontier violence had nothing to do with honor and everything to do with survival. Men were shot in the back. They were ambushed leaving buildings, gunned down in their sleep, and attacked from hiding with no warning whatsoever. The idea of giving your enemy an equal chance to kill you was considered suicidal, not noble. Smart gunfighters struck without warning and made absolutely sure their opponent never had the opportunity to return fire. John Wesley Hardin, one of the most prolific killers of the era, rarely engaged in anything resembling a fair fight. He shot men from ambush, killed enemies who didn't know he was armed, and generally employed every possible advantage. His survival through dozens of violent encounters came from ruthless pragmatism, not adherence to dueling codes. Even lawmen used ambush tactics when possible. Pat Garrett shot Billy the Kid in a darkened room. The boy never knew Garrett was there until the bullet hit him. Garrett wasn't condemned for this. He was celebrated for eliminating a dangerous outlaw by whatever means necessary. The honor code myth came from European dueling traditions and dime novel romanticism. Writers and later filmmakers imposed these civilized conventions on frontier violence to make it more palatable for audiences. But the real West operated by different rules. The only code that mattered was staying alive by any means necessary. We dug through trial records and contemporary accounts to separate these facts from the legends. If you value this kind of historical truth, subscribing helps us keep bringing these buried stories back to life. Number 4. Perfect one-shot kills. In the movies, gunfight victims clutch their chest, gasp dramatically, and collapse dead. One bullet, instant death, clean and simple. The medical reality of gunshot wounds in the Old West was horrifyingly different. Black powder cartridges of the 1870s and 80s generated far less velocity than modern ammunition. Bullets often failed to penetrate deeply or cause immediate incapacitation. Men hit multiple times continued fighting. Wounds that would be survivable today were often fatal due to infection, but death came days or weeks later, not instantly. Period accounts describe gunfight participants absorbing multiple hits and remaining in the fight. At the OK Corral, several men were wounded but continued shooting. Virgil and Morgan Earp both took bullets and kept fighting. The Clantons and McClorys who died didn't drop instantly from single perfect shots. They were hit repeatedly and died from accumulated trauma. Even fatal wounds rarely caused immediate death. A man shot through the heart might have 15 to 20 seconds of consciousness remaining. A gut shot could take days to kill through peritonitis. Lung shots were often survivable if infection didn't set in. The clean, instant deaths of Hollywood were medical fantasy. Frontier doctors had limited ability to treat gunshot wounds. Surgery was primitive, antibiotics didn't exist, and infection killed more shooting victims than the bullets themselves. A wound that seemed minor could turn fatal within days as gangrene or sepsis set in. Hollywood cleaned up this reality because extended death scenes and gruesome wound descriptions didn't play well with audiences. The instant kill became standard, creating a completely false impression of what bullets actually did to human bodies. Number 3. Women never carried guns. Western films almost exclusively show men as the armed population of the frontier. Women appear as school teachers, saloon girls, ranchers' wives, or damsels in distress. Rarely are they depicted as capable of armed violence. This myth ignores a substantial portion of frontier history. Women across the American West carried firearms for protection, used them for hunting, and sometimes employed them in violent confrontations. The challenges of frontier life didn't discriminate by gender. Women traveling alone, running businesses, or managing remote homesteads faced the same dangers as men and armed themselves accordingly. The weapon of choice for most women was the derringer. Small, concealable, and deadly at close range, these pocket pistols could be hidden in a purse, tucked into a stocking, or concealed in a bodice. Remington and Colt both produced small revolvers marketed specifically for female customers. These weren't novelties. They were practical self-defense tools. Famous women of the frontier were known to be armed. Calamity Jane carried revolvers throughout her career as a scout and entertainer. Belle Starr, the so-called bandit queen, was photographed with pistols and known to use them. Poker Alice Ivers, one of the most successful gamblers of the era, kept a revolver within reach at her table. But it wasn't just famous figures. Ordinary women across the West armed themselves against very real dangers. Assault, robbery, and murder threaten women just as they threaten men. In remote areas without reliable law enforcement, a hidden pistol might be the only protection available. Hollywood marginalized armed women because the genre focused on male heroism. Gunfights were men's business in the Western formula, but this cinematic choice erased a genuine aspect of frontier life, where women were active participants in their own defense. Number 2, the spinning gun trick. The flashy revolver spin, twirling the gun around a finger before holstering, appears in countless westerns. It signals cool confidence, absolute mastery of the weapon, and total control of the situation. No real gunfighter would ever have done this. A loaded revolver is a deadly weapon, not a performance prop. Spinning it around your finger meant pointing the barrel at yourself, bystanders, and everything else in the vicinity. One fumble, one finger slip, and you could shoot yourself or someone nearby. The trick demonstrated showmanship, not competence. And in the real West, showmanship got you killed. Professional gunfighters treated their weapons with careful respect. They holstered smoothly and drew cleanly, but they didn't play with loaded firearms. Every man who survived multiple violent encounters understood that carelessness with a gun led to accidents, and accidents on the frontier often proved fatal. The spinning gun trick came from Wild West shows and later Hollywood films where performers used unloaded or specially modified weapons. Exhibition shooters developed elaborate twirling routines to entertain audiences, but these were circus acts, not combat techniques. The skills required for showmanship were completely different from the skills required for gunfighting. Some films even show characters spinning their guns before a fight, as if it intimidated opponents. In reality, anyone who wasted time twirling a revolver instead of shooting would simply have been shot during the performance. Combat rewarded speed and accuracy, not theatrical flourishes. The spinning gun became such a standard Western image that audiences assumed it reflected reality. But like low-slung holsters and fanning the hammer, it was Hollywood invention with no basis in actual frontier practice. Number 1. Gunfighters were fearless heroes. The biggest myth Hollywood sells isn't about weapons or techniques, it's about the men themselves. Movie gunfighters stride into danger without hesitation, face death with witty one-liners, and never show a moment of doubt or fear. The psychological reality was entirely different. Violent encounters triggered overwhelming physiological responses that no amount of courage could overcome. Heart rate spiked to nearly 200 beats per minute. Fine motor control deteriorated drastically. Peripheral vision narrowed to a tunnel focused on the threat. Hands shook. Hearing distorted. Time perception warped. These weren't signs of cowardice. They were universal human responses to mortal danger that affected every person who ever faced gunfire. The difference between survivors and victims wasn't fearlessness. It was the ability to function despite overwhelming fear. Men who survived multiple gunfights weren't immune to these effects. They simply learned to work through them. Wyatt Earp's advice about taking time to aim acknowledged that panic made men rush and miss. Staying calm under fire wasn't natural bravery. It was trained discipline that overrode biological instinct. Many famous gunfighters showed clear signs of psychological trauma. Doc Holliday's alcoholism and erratic behavior suggest someone self-medicating against anxiety. Wild Bill Hickok became increasingly paranoid in his later years, always sitting with his back to the wall and startling at sudden noises. These men weren't fearless. They were damaged by the violence they experienced. The fearless hero myth serves a narrative purpose. It makes protagonists admirable and gunfights exciting. but it erases the genuine courage required to face mortal danger while experiencing overwhelming terror. Real bravery wasn't the absence of fear. It was acting despite fear. And that truth is far more impressive than any Hollywood fantasy. 13 myths, and every single one of them shaped how generations understand the American frontier. Hollywood didn't just get the details wrong. It built an entire mythology that replaced historical reality with dramatic invention. The real West wasn't clean, honorable, or glamorous. It was messy, brutal, and driven by survival rather than showmanship. Every low-slung holster, every fanned hammer, every high-noon duel was a lie told for entertainment. The truth was men who shot from ambush, counted every precious round, and trembled with fear while they fought. Cowboys who couldn't afford revolvers, women who armed themselves against real dangers, violence that ended in seconds and left survivors traumatized for life. Understanding these myths matters because they shape how we think about violence, courage, and history itself. The romanticized West influences everything from gun culture to political rhetoric to our basic assumptions about American identity. Separating fact from fiction isn't just academic. It's essential for understanding who we actually were and who we've become. If you've made it to the end, you've seen through the Hollywood facade to the gritty reality beneath. No more myths, no more legends, just the truth about the guns and the men who carried them. Subscribe for more journeys into the real history that the movies never wanted you to know.